Welcome again to World Talks. Here, every word matters. I'm Anna Kalczyńska. So, trade tariffs imposed on EU steel and aluminum by President Donald Trump is a major trade policy issue that could have far-reaching implications for global markets. 25% tariffs will significantly impact the European Union's economy, trade relations and industrial sector. To help us understand the potential consequences, we are now joined by Iain Begg, Professor Research Fellow, London School of Economics. Good evening. Thank you for being with us today.
Good evening.
So let us start with the economic impact. How would the reintroduction of these tariffs affect European steel and aluminum industries, particularly in terms of production costs and competitiveness?
Well, the obvious answer is that steel producers and aluminium producers inside the European Union who depend on the US market are likely to see a downturn in the demand for their products, at least from the US. But it's the second-order effects which are often more significant. Thus, if the US ceases to buy European steel or European aluminium and clamps down on purchases from bigger producers such as Canada or China, the impact could be on European producers that they face new competitors in their existing markets, including domestically within the EU. So you have to look at both the effect coming directly from the US and the indirect effect on other producers.
Mm-hmm. And now, as to the retaliation, we hear from the European politicians, especially in Germany, that we are ready, we will brace up for what's coming, and we were ready from day one. So what is the EU likely to respond to such tariffs? Could we see countermeasures similar to those implemented in response to Trump's 1-0, that is the previous trade policy?
Well, I'm sure in a secret room in the European Commission in Brussels, there's a long list of things that will be subject to new tariffs if Trump goes ahead as he says he will. And that if is important because we never quite know with Trump whether things will actually happen or they're being used as a bargaining chip to get something else done. But let's suppose it actually happens. Then the EU would say, for example, we could impose tariffs on American agricultural products, soya beans, and buy them from somewhere else in the world. Or we could impose tariffs on finished goods coming from the European Union. We had the example in Trump 1 of Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Maybe American bourbon whiskey will have tariffs imposed on it. I'm sure there's a list. We don't know what that list is, and it will depend a bit on how European policymakers view what's happening and whether they see it as a huge threat or one which is more targeted at specific sectors, such as aluminium and steel, and whether that's going to be followed by further sectors. The risk, obviously, if you retaliate, is you get retaliation on the retaliation, and you end up with a trade war which benefits nobody because it then becomes a zero-sum game or a negative-sum game.
Mm-hmm. Well, another measure would be, for instance, to go to the court, right? World Trade Organization, for instance. Previously, the challenged Trump's tariffs were taken to WTO. Could we expect similar legal actions this time, and how effective
well, somebody might try, but it takes a very long time to adjudicate. And in any case, the dispute resolution system of the World Trade Organization is in complete disarray because successive American presidents, not just Trump one, but also Biden and even Obama before him, decided not to name new judges for the World Trade Organization's court. So it's not something that is going to provide any kind of rapid remedy which would feed into diminishing the economic impact.
Mm-hmm. Some argue that Trump's tariffs are more about political strategy than economic necessity. Do you see this as a move aimed at rallying simply domestic support rather than addressing real trade imbalances?
Well, there are multiple answers to that question. Some of the things that Trump has tried to do have been associated with specific political objectives. The initial statement that Canada and Mexico would be subject to 25% tariffs was to induce them to do more to curb immigration in the case of, or immigration in the case of Mexico, because so many immigrants from Latin American countries were transiting through Mexico. In the case of Canada, it was maybe because there was a concern that Canada was seen as not very supportive of Trump's wider ideas. You can expect that kind of blackmail to continue from Trump. It seems to be part of his way of operating. And then you have the much more specifically economic tariffs that your previous guest was talking about when he mentioned the fact that China is the target. Indeed, China might be seen as the target in all kinds of ways because it was also an indirect supplier to the US through Mexico. So there's the economic dimension and there's a political dimension externally. And then domestically, Trump can portray this as saying, I am standing up for America. Look at me. I'm the great Donald Trump. I'm saving your jobs. The trouble is that analyses from his first term in office don't suggest that many jobs were saved by his tariffs. And there are many reasons for that.
We'll see how this situation evolves, definitely. Now, let me just, for a second, delve on the impact on EU and US relations politically. How could such tariffs affect broader EU-US relations, especially in the context of ongoing discussions on trade and defense cooperation? Do you see a link here?
This is the way Trump operates. He links the political and the economic. I'm sure that in the European Union, nobody really wants to have a political dispute with the US, not least because of security considerations and trying to find a solution to what's going on in Ukraine. But for Trump, the political and the economic are so closely mixed that it's all part of his strategy to impose his will on other countries. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point he came out with a line saying, unless European countries increase their defense expenditure as a share of GDP, Poland excluded, obviously, because it's already there, then he's going to make their life more difficult by having much more intensive tariffs and other trade sanctions. So yes, he has a political agenda in this. Now, the Europeans would like to soft pedal it. They'd like to be able to say, we want a sensible solution. We want to do things which don't cause mutual economic damage. But with someone as unpredictable as Trump, it's very hard to make that kind of statement and follow it through. Indeed, an easy phrase to use is that the one thing that's predictable about Trump is that he's unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. So we try to understand, actually, this measure imposed by Donald Trump, as the United States and the European Union have the world's largest commercial relationship. Only in 2023, the trading was 1.5 trillion euros of goods and services. So I wonder, is there really no other measure, no other possibility to build those trade relations than just to wage a war, trade war?
Well, this is where Trump's mentality comes into the picture. He is what we would call a mercantilist. He believes that if the US loses, Europe gains. And if he's able to manufacture a position where Europe loses, then the US gains. He doesn't see that there is a common interest in having open trade, because in the end, if you have very open trade, your consumers are able to purchase at the lowest costs. Your manufacturers are able to import their goods that they require in the production process at lower cost. He simply sees this as, if there's a trade deficit, bad. I want to cure that trade deficit, and it doesn't matter whether that's damaging US industry and US consumers alongside European industries. So it's a very strange way of looking at the world and flies in the face of 200 years of economic analysis since the initial proponents of trade theory articulated their views.
So let me just quote Olaf Scholz, who says, if the USA adopts a customs policy, there will be one very export-oriented nation that will suffer greatly as a result, and that nation is Germany. Do you see this way, as a measure targeting Germany?
Well, yes, because Germany's economic model is one based on success in exporting. They're already facing trouble in China because their offer in China is less attractive to the Chinese consumer. China is developing its motor vehicles industry very rapidly. So China's imports of high-value German cars is diminishing, you could see the same sort of thing affecting Germany. And let's face it, that could be a double hit for Germany, which is going to be very damaging to what is, after all, a core economy of the European Union.
So let's look onwards. How does the future outlook? What long-term effect could this have on global trade landscape? Would it push the EU, for instance, to seek stronger trade alliances elsewhere, China, for that matter, or other markets?
It's possible that the EU response will be to look towards the rest of the world, not just China, because you have other major importers, major trading nations like India, much of Latin America, other countries in East Asia, Korea, Japan, and so on. And if the European effort switches in that direction, it sort of isolates the Americans, who will say, well, it doesn't bother us because we're self-sufficient. We're self-sufficient in energy. We don't need to import manufacturers from the rest of the world. It'd be a very odd picture if America separated itself from the rest of the world. But there are clearly opportunities for the Europeans to look elsewhere.
Thank you, Iain Begg, for sharing your insights with us tonight. We will be watching closely to see how this situation unfolds. And thank you very much for being with us.
It's a difficult situation.
And thank you for watching TVP World and World Talks. Please stay tuned to TVP World for more news, more comments. Thank you for being with us.